Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off today's show by discussing U.S. politics, and the U.S. Senate has voted that the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump is constitutional in senators' opinions, the majority of senators' opinions, I should say, after the House impeachment managers had presented their case. There was a video presented as well, which is being called, chilling, etc. I've watched the video as well, as I'm sure our guests and experts and many viewers have as well. This also, as a poll by CBS News and YouGov says that 70% of those who currently align themselves with the Republican Party say that they would consider possibly joining a separate party if Donald Trump were to form such a party himself, political party, that is. Let's put both of those issues to our experts who are joining us this morning. We're joined now by Dr. Robert Spitzer, who is a distinguished service professor of political science at State University of New York at Cortland. He's joining us this morning from Cortland, New York. Joining us this morning from St. Paul, Minnesota is Jeffrey Marty, who is an attorney and political commentator. Jeffrey and Robert, good morning to you both, and thank you for joining us. Robert, let me start with you. Let's start with the first issue, and that is, of course, of the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. In your opinion, is it constitutional to hold such an impeachment trial after a president has already left office?
The answer to that question is that it is constitutional, and there are several reasons why. First, the Senate has complete authority to decide matters of impeachment, including such procedures. Secondly, the actions of Donald Trump that are in play did occur while he was president. And if impeachment were not allowed because Trump is no longer in office, what that would mean is that a president could engage in impeachable activities and then resign and then leave office and therefore avoid impeachment. Moreover, in the history of impeachment trials, there have been two trials that did occur after the individual subject to an impeachment trial had left office, yet those trials did run to completion after the person left. So I think it's very clear that the Senate has every right to proceed with this. And in fact, I would argue beyond that it is their duty and obligation to do so, given the gravity, the importance, the significance, and the threat that arose from the actions of Donald Trump.
Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on that, on the constitutionality of all this?
I don't believe that the impeachment trial itself is constitutional because it's intended to remove a sitting president from office, although it's possible, I suppose, to have a carryover effect in the event of resignation. But Donald Trump completed his term before the impeachment was brought, and the absence of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, says a lot as far as where the Supreme Court would go on this issue, because he's not even there to conduct the trial in the Senate. So I think it's very unlikely that the Supreme Court would uphold any sort of removal if President Trump were convicted somehow in the Senate. The Senate does not decide whether the issue or whether the constitutionality issue has been answered or not, because while they voted to go forward with it, I think the purpose of Rand Paul bringing that vote in the first place was to show that the Senate is not going to go along with the impeachment itself. If they were to go through with the entire proceeding, it's going to require 2/3 of the body, and there is only support. I think there were 6 Republican defectors for the impeachment that voted in favor of it, who just happened to vote in favor for every sort of removal proceeding that involves President Trump. This is their second time trying this, and it's failed the other time. It's going to fail this time. But
okay, lost our connection there, Jeffrey. We'll try to get him back on. Robert, let me go back to you, and let me ask you, Robert, at issue, I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is also how the general public will view this second impeachment trial, right? Certainly there are those who want Donald Trump to be held to account. I've watched the video. You've watched the video. We know what happened, certainly, when it came to the Capitol riot, and I don't think anybody in their right mind necessarily supports what happened there. But do you think that this is the best medium to hold Trump to account? Because on the face of it, this comes off extremely partisan and divisive, right? And probably makes Biden's job a lot harder to, as he in his own words said, bring the country together?
Well, I will say first that President Biden has pretty much removed himself directly from the dispute, from the ongoing trial in the Senate. After all, he's not in the Senate right now. It is the sole prerogative of the Senate. And I think I think he's been prudent in not actively weighing in on the pros and cons of the impeachment trial itself. And the administration, his administration, is proceeding to do the things that it needs to do, addressing the pandemic and the economy's downturn and many other things. Obviously, there is a partisan shadow that hangs over this, but it is notable that unlike past impeachment efforts, there has been some bipartisan support. That is 11 Republicans in the House of Representatives supported the impeachment vote. And as the previous speaker noted, 6 senators have indicated through an earlier procedural vote that they thought the charges were valid and should go ahead. And indeed, there is reason to believe that there may be more Republican senators who might, when the final vote comes, who might vote to convict. Now, it is highly unlikely that they will reach the 2/3 majority, because under the Constitution, you have to reach the extraordinary 2/3 majority to impeach and remove, or convict, I should say. And removal isn't the only penalty associated with impeachment. It also includes the ability of the Senate to vote separately to bar the individual from seeking office in the future. So that is another question, another reason why the Senate has a right and indeed an obligation to weigh in on this matter.
All right, so Jeffrey, let's talk then about what this then does going forward, right? I'm going to bring in that other issue of the political party that, there's talk of that Donald Trump may very well form. I mean, it may or may not happen. I haven't seen anything very concrete in that regard necessarily of that for sure happening. But this just further creates divides, do you think? I mean, do you think that possibly if Donald Trump was to even be held to account for the Capitol riot, that this should have been done maybe through an independent court outside of the Senate/House of Representatives? I mean, is that even doable within the system, the judicial system?
I believe it probably would be doable if you're going to talk about some sort of incitement or terroristic threats that the president supposedly made that inspired this riot. But I don't think that there's really much proof of that at all. I mean, that what they're saying is that he had incited this mob to go in and to infiltrate the Capitol when he actually was still speaking at the time that this event started. And on top of that, about 20 minutes, I think, and then it's over a mile away from where he was speaking. So the idea that there's a causal connection between what he said and what these people did is tenuous at best. There is a lot of interest, I believe, in a third-party option involving President Trump if he were to be somehow excluded from the Republican Party. But I think that most people that are within the Republican Party at this point support Trump, the vast majority, and that it's unlikely that we're going to see the creation of a third party unless the establishment of the Republican Party were to ban President Trump somehow. I don't believe that'll happen. I think that President Trump is definitely in the control of the party right now, as much as the media would like to pretend otherwise. Much of the time when they speak as if though these 6 Republican senators are the ones who really carry the basis, or Liz Cheney from the House. These people are beyond unpopular. If you were to look at their Twitter accounts, every tweet is ratioed in the extreme as far as criticism and condemnation. So I doubt most of them will even be running again next time. And if they do, that they're likely to get primaried in the initial phase of the election.
Okay, so then, Robert, that brings me then to this, if I may use that term, Trumpism, and I don't want to completely generalize all Republicans in being, part of this wave of Trumpism. But do you think that will then very much remain a reality, which Biden and Democrats and even other Republicans will continue to deal with going forward, for good or bad, whether they support him or not? He has strong support, does he not? And how does one then move beyond that, be it through the impeachment trial or other such measures?
Well, there is a real struggle for the soul of the Republican Party. Donald Trump, of course, has been president for 4 years. He won the nomination in 2016. And the winning presidential candidate is always the effective head of the political party. but Trump is no longer in office. Polling that shows Trump is the leading Republican candidate for president right now are essentially meaningless. All they indicate is the fact that Trump has been president for the last 4 years and is the most well-known. And of course, he has a deep following within the Republican Party. There's no doubt about that. But 4 years, the next election, is a very long time down the road. And I will agree with the other speaker that I think it unlikely that we will see the development of a Trump third party for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it's very difficult to start a real nationwide third party movement. The last time it happened was some 30 years ago by a billionaire named Ross Perot. And he had a lot of money to spend and Trump does not, among other things. I think what will happen within the Republican Party is that you will hear more dissident voices, and indeed you will see Republicans who have challenged Trump, such as Liz Cheney, remain in office. Yeah. They are very much concerned about insurgent primary threats for people like Liz Cheney. But I think you will find, especially as the months wear on, that Trump is going to recede in the headlines, and other Republicans who are interested in being president will become more prominent.
Jeffrey, we just have about a minute left, so I'm going to ask you a very, very loaded question. Who do you think then is responsible for what happened in the Capitol riot? I mean, if not Trump, then I would think that, we can't just let what happened just dissipate, right? I mean, somebody holds responsibility for this breakdown of order, this threat to senators / House of Representatives members.
I don't believe that there's any sort of personal accountability for President Trump as far as inciting what happened at the Capitol. I think that my personal belief is that there is probably some involvement of extremist groups that were trying to undermine the rally by creating a broken windows effect, by changing clothes into patriotic gear. I saw a video of this from black bloc Antifa type clothing to patriotic gear, going in and smashing windows, and then the police, maybe to a certain degree, there's videos out there of them standing down and opening the gates or opening the doors or saying and doing almost nothing to stop people from getting into the building, which was an interesting phenomenon. Now, it's ready-made for TV, but I don't think that President Trump ever said anything or did anything that made people think that this was what the desired outcome. For people to charge the building, to put anyone in fear. And if you look at the same people who are accusing him now, they were the ones who did not ask for a greater police presence, knowing that this rally was happening. They also they did not they did nothing to condemn the riots that happened all last summer from Black Lives Matter and Antifa throughout the entire nation, burning down the cities. So, I mean, there's a great deal of hypocrisy that's involved here, beyond just the factual issues that they have proving that Trump incited anything.
All right, we'll have to leave those off word, but we appreciate both Robert and Jeffrey for giving us their points of view and their expertise, certainly on this issue. As you could tell, with both of our guests on polar opposites in some regards, and of course they did agree in many regards also, but it's important to have those discussions because I think that many times it's just one or the other discussion that is happening. It's important to understand the other side too, because I think that just taking this on its face value as saying Donald Trump is responsible for this is fine. But then on the other side, we need to also understand why people may have carried out this sort of riot. What were the root causes of that? And what are their grievances, legitimate or not? And again, those can be discussed, but those need to be understood so that, as Biden says, and if he is, of course, genuine in his claim that he wants to bring the country together, he has to work hard at that. I mean, it seems right now that it's an uphill battle to bring the country together. I mean, there's so much divisiveness, and this trial will only, will it not, bring further divisiveness. And that is not to say that no one should be held accountable for what happened at Capitol Hill, but who? That remains the open question then. I'll be back with the next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss a census that has come out, a poll, pardon me, come out through the Muslim census in the UK that has found that around 79% of British Muslims are dissatisfied with the current government. That is the government of Boris Johnson. 95% percent plus of those Muslims who were surveyed by the Muslim census said that they were, quote, unsure or tend not to trust the government. And 57% said this was due to the government's previous or current mishandlings and injustices. And this does not only have to do with issues that center just around Muslims, but we can also talk about the Windrush generation and a whole host of other issues which the UK has faced in recent years as well. Let's discuss that further with our experts who are joining us now. We're now joined by Zahed Amanullah, who is a resident senior fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. He is joining us today from London. And joining us today from Leicester is Dr. Ismail Patel, who is the chair of the Friends of Al-Aqsa. He's also a doctorate in Islamophobia. Ismail and Zahed, thank you both for taking your time out to join us here in Scope today. Ismail, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of this poll? I mean, 79% is quite a high number. Where is the Johnson government going wrong?
Thanks for inviting me to discuss this very important issue of that is affecting Muslims in Britain. I think in a way it's not a shock, because what we see here is a reflection of literally a few decades of targeting of Muslims. And this has now accumulated to a position that it's institutionally embedded within the government itself and the Tory party in particular. And Muslims are now becoming more and more aware as the different aspects of their lives are being impacted, and they do not have a recourse to justice. And I think that's a very important aspect for us to bear in mind, that when in a democratic system, it becomes difficult for citizens to find a redress to their discrimination. And I think that is a big concern. So the figures for somebody living in Britain are not alarming. They are alarming rather, but not something new or newsworthy in that sense.
Right, so let me flip the question then to you then, Zahed. This should be, though, alarming for the Johnson government because, I mean, at some point there will be elections, right? Muslims are and have been part of UK society and voting a bit, and there are a significant voting base as well. I mean, I would think that this level of disconnect with such an important part of society is troubling, isn't it?
It is troubling, and actually, this year has really been a perfect storm of issues that the Conservative governments have really failed on, from the pandemic to social justice issues to Islamophobia as well. I remember Boris Johnson, when he was campaigning, promised an inquiry into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, and of course that didn't happen, and it's not likely to happen as long as the Tories are leading in the polls. And strangely enough, that is the case. Labour has really struggled to capitalize on the Johnson government's mishandling of the pandemic to gain the rise in the polls. And of course, as you mentioned, that really won't matter for another 4 years until there's another election. I do want to bring up one point, though, because I looked into some of the data behind the poll, and Muslim Census, to their credit, published a dashboard with the breakdown of the findings. And the findings skew very much toward young people in London. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that certainly reflects their views. I think 75% of the people they surveyed were under 27, 50% were from London, and I think even 41% were Asian Bangladeshi. This is, to say that 5% of Muslims in the UK don't trust, or 95% don't trust the government, is a slightly misleading, and the only reason I bring that up is because polls of British Muslims in the past have been used to slander British Muslims in terms of and having either loaded questions in their surveys or taking elements out of context. And so I just would want to put that out there, just because I think we should be very, very careful about statements like all of British Muslims in 95% of them don't trust the government, when really this is weighed very heavily toward young people in London. And I just want to put that out there, just so that we can treat polls with the seriousness that they deserve. No,
you're completely right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's certainly, yes, polls can sometimes be misleading, as you correctly there said. Ismail, on the point of the government and its relations with the Muslim community as they stand right now, I mean, I would think an argument can be made on the part of the government that it does have cabinet members who are people of color from the BAME communities, as we would call them. Is that enough? I mean, and why is that not enough? Let me put it that way, in fact.
Well, first thing, let's go back a little bit to a very important point that Zahed raised, is the Conservative Party itself in the last election deliberately did not reach out to the Muslim community, and this was a election strategy. And this is something very important for Muslims in Britain to understand, that the Conservative Party does not see its alliance coming or its support coming from the Muslim community, and they're not reaching out to the Muslims. So Muslims would have to do more than just hope that the next election will bring about a change. And the Conservatives somehow will start listening to the Muslims because elections are around the corner. And this is a political strategy where Muslims have become insignificant in the wider democratic process. We Muslims in Britain, there's a debate between 25 and 30 seats where we can control for the parliament of 635 seats. So it's not a major significant change. Of course, it could be a deal breaker if there was a hung parliament, but we haven't had that for a while now, since last two elections, and it's not likely to happen in the next election. But going back to the wider concern about the dissatisfaction of Muslims and how the Conservative Party can be perceived in this context, the idea that the party itself would change its stance simply because of how Muslims are feeling, I think it's something we need to change, and Muslims themselves need to become more active and create a counter discourse to the government itself and make alliances with other communities that we mentioned earlier, like Black Lives Matter, the Afro-Caribbean community, the Sikh community, and others. And to your point that you raised regarding Black and ethnic minority within the government, simply because of your color, if you have brown or black color, it doesn't mean you're not racist. I think we have to get away from this idea that only white people can be racist. I think that the whole idea has now, it's looking around the world itself, you see that Muslims are more likely to be oppressed by fellow Muslims than other people of other color. And I think that should be borne in mind, that people of color a presentation of people of color is not a reflection of their inclusiveness.
Very interesting. What do you make of that, Zahed? Because, I don't know, the name Priti Patel comes to mind, Sajid Javid. There's a whole host of other people, and I know not all of the above, of course, are Muslim, but I mean, in the sense that they're representative of people of color, right, from different backgrounds and different walks of life and different faiths and ethnicities. Is that sort of just... I don't know how to put it, but is that just a public display or something on the part of the Johnson government to show that, hey, listen, our credentials are that we do bring in all sorts of people, but then in reality their policies are not actually serving all those communities well?
Well, I mean, I think it's both implicit and explicit in the way that the Conservative government has presented itself to the public. We saw a lot of this during the election campaign, where, for example, Sajid Javid would talk about his Muslim background, but you don't really hear much about that when policies are being formulated once they're in power. So I would avoid making personal attacks on people, even though we can see the hypocrisy, if only to focus on policies and building alliances with people who can help get into power and put those policies into practice. I want to bring up the way that Islamophobia was addressed in the U.S. elections, because I think we see a formula there that might work in the long term. We saw the Islamophobia coming right from the top with the Donald Trump administration, but we also saw a very, very strong effort to build intersectionality into the way that Muslims address social justice issues. That doesn't just mean getting allies on board with issues of concern to Muslims, like the Muslim ban, but also meant, as Dr. Patel actually referenced, taking up social justice issues like Black Lives Matter, and wider issues like, we saw what happened at Grenfell and so forth. These have to be part and parcel of the message that British Muslims have that concern all of society. I think only then will you see a difference in elections and a difference in who's in power.
And that's a very good point. And I know that, Ismail, you brought that up as well. But how important then is that sort of solidarity? And do you think that that is reaping fruit? Not to say that Muslims are only doing it for their own selfish reasons to stand up for all of the above causes. It's the right thing to do, certainly. But do you think that there is support then coming from other quarters as well when it comes to issues of Islamophobia?
Absolutely. I mean, Zahed must be aware that when we have demonstration in London against racism and Islamophobia, I would say more than 50% of the participants in those demonstrations, when we have up to 10, 20,000 people, are non-Muslims. So that is very encouraging. And that is the only way we can move forward in a democracy. And we want to make government accountable for what it's doing and bring it to answer to the public. Is by having alliances across the board. Remember, this government, as you said, despite its having people of color within its, not as only as MPs, but as ministers, prominent ministers, from the Chancellor of Exchequer to the Home Secretary, a very, very powerful position. It is one of the most right-wing governments we've had for many years. And that has to come across, that people have to be looked at from their ideological perspective rather than their color or their faith. And I think that is very important. And we, as a civil society, need to bring about different groups together, as Zahed has mentioned about intersectionality, and strengthen that against the establishment. Otherwise, what will happen is different groups will be picked up and they'll be targeted in its own sort of little enclave and be able to marginalize them. And therefore, the whole society can then either ignore them or even they get together to attack them, like what is happening in France. Remember, France just across the sea, very unlike America, we have a different paradigm there, where the left government and also the centrist government now are also pandering to the right wing and using Muslim bashing as a means to gain political votes. And that is something that can happen here in Britain as well. And I think we're in a position that we cannot really see where the future is, but we have to become very careful.
Indeed. Well, the clock has gotten the best of us, but we do sincerely appreciate both Ismail and Zahed for taking their time out, for sharing their expert insight with us and contextualizing, these sorts of polls for us. As Zahed correctly mentioned, we don't want to overstate things or misstate things, in fact, as they may stand on the ground there in the UK. Nevertheless, of course, it is an undeniable reality, as both of our guests are mentioned, that relations between the Muslim community and the current government are not good, regardless of any people of color who may be in the cabinet at this time. And certainly there's no personal grudges against them, but it's just a fact of life that they are right-wing, and that those even having those people in the cabinet has not changed, in fact, policy making towards, for example, the Muslim community and certainly other communities as well, such as the Black community or others. The Black Lives Matter movement still very much an important issue within the UK, something that Muslims do stand for as well. And as Ismail there mentioned, also there is then the support then coming from the other quarters also, these other marginalized quote-unquote communities, if I may use that term, supporting each other. And that sort of solidarity, I would think, is where the solution really lies. And that sort of thing really then puts pressure on governments to hopefully act and to reform themselves, to correct their mistakes towards any communities as a whole. I'll leave with it for now. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this final segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Sri Lanka and how it's been dealing with not only its Muslim citizens, but also its Christians, in fact, on the issue of cremations during the pandemic. The latest news coming out of Sri Lanka is, of course, that seemingly the government has reversed course when it comes to cremations going forward for Muslim citizens of the country. However, certainly this was not an easy battle to win. We had just a day or two ago the Muslim Council of Britain, as well as a law firm, also filing a complaint against Sri Lanka and against the fact that it was cremating Muslims as well as Christians, I should add, of course, as well. Because, of course, as we know, within Islamic values and morals, bodies are buried and not cremated. And in fact, the WHO and UN experts had a number of times told the Sri Lankan government that by burying people, there was no threat to the spread of the virus, as the Sri Lankan government was so claiming. Now, is this in a long line, as some experts would see, of Islamophobia from the side of the Sri Lankan government towards 10% of its population, which again is not a small number, certainly, especially potentially, possibly in the wake of the Easter Sunday bombings also. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Tayab Ali, who is a partner at Bindman's LLP. He's a solicitor advocate joining us today from London. Joining us this morning from Charlotte, North Carolina is Faris Hussain, who is the chairperson of the Sri Lankan Task Force by Justice for All. Faris and Tayab, thank you both for taking your time out and joining us here in Scope today. Faris, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of the fact that Sri Lanka has now seemingly made the right decision?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on the show. Sri Lanka has been, the Islamophobia has been spreading all over the place. And it has been since almost 2009. There are several issues. COVID victims burial wasn't the only issue Sri Lankan Muslims have been facing. Lately, that was one of the major issues that has been faced by the Sri Lankan Muslims. And the government has given assurance on several occasions that they will allow burial. These promises have been made in the past as well. And they have said that they will find a wetland because they somehow assume that it will be transferred through water, and that's not the case. And then recently, the junior health minister made a comment at the parliament stating, the virus is not transmitted through the water. And one of the Muslim MPs recently asked Prime Minister in Parliament about the COVID burial. That was the reason that was given all along, because it was transmitted through the water. And then he came out and said, look, we're going to allow burial. But as of today, it wasn't gazetted. We have no idea when they will allow. But as of now, there is nothing gazetted or the law has not been passed to allow burial.
Yeah, I know you represent a significant number of clients. Have you had a chance to get reactions from them about this latest decision of the Sri Lankan government to find on a reverse course? I mean, I would think that for a lot of them, it's too little too late, considering a lot of their loved ones have already been cremated.
In regards to my clients, the people that have already lost somebody and had their deceased family member cremated, there is no resolution. You can't go back in time and fix that. What my clients are concerned about, including the Muslim Council of Britain, is how we deal with people going forward. So there needs to be two parts to this: the recognition of the violation of my clients' rights in terms of being able to bury their deceased family members in accordance with their religious rights and in accordance with their personal preference, which is allowed in international law, as well as making sure that people in the future that have family members that pass away from COVID are not forced to cremate their loved ones. And what's really interesting at the moment, and really important actually, is the President Rajapaksa's announcement in Parliament that he's going to allow burials. Well, we've heard this before. And we've also seen previous indications from the government in Sri Lanka that they will allow burial. But I'm not confident, as neither are my clients, that this will actually convert from words in parliamentary building into policy on the ground. And so we're watching this very closely to see if in actual fact there is a change in policy. And Sri Lanka will now allow burial of people that have passed away as a result of COVID.
Faris, as I said in my introduction, Muslims make up 10% of the Sri Lankan population. It doesn't make sense, at least to me, to be targeting such a significant portion of the population. Why do you think it is that they are being targeted in this fashion? And why would the pandemic then be misused in this fashion?
I think this Islamophobia in Sri Lanka wasn't something new. It was started after the civil war of 2009. The extreme Buddhists started targeting Muslims. There were a lot of Islamophobia rhetoric that came out during that time. And they were pretty much saying, look, Muslims, there were a lot of lies around spread in the country about Muslims, stating that Muslims going to be overtaking the Sinhala population. There was a lot of accusations against Muslim businesses, Muslim doctors, Muslim journalists, and Muslim lawyers were jailed right? And this is an accusation that's built up over time, and now, especially during the last election, the politicians took advantage of the situation. If you look at the present government, majority of the votes were from the Sinhalese population. So they're pandering to that crowd, and they're building up this hysteria of Islamophobia. And that's exactly what is happening. So to obtain the votes, they have to continue this type of rhetoric against the Muslim community.
Yeah.
And this COVID there is no basis for cremation. And this is just to target the Muslim community. And that's the whole reason the government is doing it right now.
Tayab, there was a lot of talk, certainly in the wake of the Easter Sunday bombings as well. I know about the Muslim community and its place within Sri Lanka and how it was being treated in the aftermath of that. Is this, in your opinion, a continuation of that sort of tensions that we're seeing, or is this, as Faris has there said, a much longer standing issue in the country?
Well, I think something that we've seen across the globe, actually, is an increase in anti-Muslim sentiment, Islamophobia, if you like. And this is something that concerns me as a human rights lawyer, but also concerns the Muslim Council of Britain. And it's something that we're looking at very carefully. There's clearly the issues in terms of national security that governments then use against Muslim communities in many countries, and I think this is part and parcel of what's happening in Sri Lanka. I think what's happened in Sri Lanka, particularly after the Easter Day bombings, is that there has been a focus on using discrimination against Muslims as a political football to feed into a popularist agenda and allow and try to gain support from the general population in respect of demonizing a certain aspect of the community. Now, we know this historically we know that this is a very dangerous thing that could happen in terms of even the United States of America. And we saw what populist sentiments pushed by the President of the United States of America led to a raid on the Capitol building itself. So in places like Sri Lanka, this is extraordinarily dangerous rhetoric coming from the government, particularly when something as simple as allowing a community to bury their dead in accordance with their ritual obligations is such a simple thing, and it really is unnecessary for this to happen this way. I mean, the policy in Sri Lanka is just very simply discriminatory. And what's really important, and you take some heart from this, is that all aspects of civil society in Sri Lanka, whether they be Buddhist or Christian, support my clients in their claim to restore their religious right to be buried in the way that the religion dictates that they should. And so this is not just a Muslim issue in Sri Lanka. It's become a political issue, and this is really unfortunate.
So, Faris, I'm wondering, many times when we see politicians resort to hate in any form, then that's usually seen as a distraction from bigger issues. So is Sri Lanka facing economic issues? Is that what the politicians are distracting the public from?
It is definitely a huge economic issue in Sri Lanka right now. If you look at the government, they have been selling the national assets. China is playing a bigger role. India is playing a bigger role, and the Sri Lankan citizens are very upset with the government of what is happening. Right, the economy wasn't doing well, and so this is a distraction. Right, they weren't talking about the economy. They weren't talking about this government. It's an ultra-nationalist government. They came to power, stating that, we would not, going through the phase of selling the Sri Lankan assets. And so this is definitely a distraction from that promise that the government has made.
Very well. The clock has gotten the best of us, but we do sincerely appreciate both Faris and Tayab for their time today and for, of course, giving us their insight about Sri Lanka and how it's been dealing with its own Muslim citizens as well as Christian citizens. As I said in my introduction, and both of our guests are alluded to, this does not just affect the Muslims of Sri Lanka, that the issue of cremations of bodies done for no good reason, really, because even the United Nations, the WHO, repeatedly, twice at least, to the best of my knowledge, told the Sri Lankan government, you don't didn't need to cremate bodies to ensure that they do not pass on the virus through groundwater or whatever other reasons that the government had come up with. Now it has finally seemingly relented on the issue, saying that burials will now be allowed. But as Tayab said as well, for his clients and for others who have already lost loved ones to the virus and those who have already been cremated, it is too late. I mean, you can't go back in time now, right? So those that hurt that has been caused, that desecration of those bodies, according to Islamic rights and understanding, has already occurred. So those hard feelings already exist there. What will the government do regarding that in order to win back the trust of its own, again, Muslim citizens in this regard? I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.